Welcome back to the second part of the ISPCP outreach session here at ICANN 85. This session will now cover the topic of universal acceptance. So we will kick things off with Ram wearing his hat for CODI, introducing us to the general concept of multilingualism in the internet, followed by Nitin, who will make the connection to the world of the ISPs. And then we will hear from Nabil more about the work of the USG here at ICANN to complete the full picture of universal acceptance in this world. So with this, I would like to hand over to Ram. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Lars, and appreciate the invitation here. Welcome, everyone, to this session. CODI is Coalition on Digital Impact. It's a newly formed organization, and I wanted to share what it is and what it's trying to do. Here's the reality. If you want true digital participation in the internet, then we believe that it ought to be in your own language. Because when it's in your own language, online content, services can be made accessible to people from diverse internet backgrounds, right? So that's the idea that sparked the beginning of CODI. What CODI envisions is a world where language is never a barrier to accessing knowledge, connecting with others, or participating in the digital age. So imagine a world where every person can navigate the internet in their own language. That's not a world that exists today, but that's a world that ought to exist. And it's not only because technology is not there. There are several other factors that contribute to being unable to navigate the internet in your own language. This is especially for those of you who are not monolingual, and as I suspect that 100% of the people in this room are experienced in more than one language. But these things that are up on the screen ought to resonate with you, right? Language plays a crucial role in digital access. If you look at the barriers to information accessibility, if information and resources online are not in your own language, it can hinder access to that information. But also, it can hinder your ability to access economic opportunity, jobs, educational opportunities, simply because the content is not available or information is not available in the language that you're most familiar with, that you're most comfortable with. There's a third factor, which is a trust factor. I'm sure each one of you, in your travels around the world or travels in your country, have encountered somebody who is not a native speaker of your language, but who makes an attempt to speak to you in your language. It may just be to say hello, it may be to say thank you or something like that. And almost automatically, you find yourself smiling at them, or you find yourself being a little bit more open to them. And that's a human element, right? Because trust and engagement is linked to language, right? And the next part, of course, is that when anybody talks about culture, almost by default, it's language. It's the link to culture is not just via something unique to you, but there's a language associated with it, right? So when information is presented in a user's native language, it's likely to be more culturally relevant to the user. And finally, there is data, there are facts that show that there are 7 dominant languages on the internet today. 7. There are over 7,000 languages in the world. So if you take that trend and you extrapolate it, the likelihood is that many of the world's languages are going to get marginalized, if not really become extinct online. So if you want to preserve language through digital means, then, and if we want to maintain linguistic diversity, then language is an important component of it. What we're trying to do at CODI is to support organizations that are already doing the work of helping communities connect to digital resources, right? So the intent of CODI is not to reinvent the work, but is to complement it, to amplify existing initiatives that are being done around the world. How do we do it? education, research, and advocacy. Those are the three areas of focus. If you don't educate stakeholders on why digital gaps that exist become worse if you don't integrate language into it, then you cannot actually, then the people who make decisions don't even understand that you ought to integrate language into your design phase. We're doing research on showcasing how language is an important component, and we want to work with policymakers to advocate for policies that expand multilingualism. How are we going to do this? Technology, tools, and standards, representation and preservation, and access and impact. Look at the bottom there, we talked about the three pillars: research, advocacy, education, awareness, capacity building. But inside of those, we're focusing on tools and standards, representation, and access. That's what we're doing. So I'm really excited to also share a little bit of a project that we're working on right now. This is the inaugural research project. We're defining the minimum viable data set for cultural and linguistic empowerment. And the idea here is, especially with the advent of AI and generative AI and natural language tools, I already said earlier, most languages are underrepresented in digital systems, but they're even more underrepresented in LLMs and in the AI oriented systems. Our thinking is, can we define a minimum viable data set that is required for a language to participate in the AI economy? What signals indicate that the data set is ready for different levels of digital use? Because today, if you look at it, you go to an engine and you say translate, and it gives you translation. Does that mean that engine is actually capable in a language? It may be able to translate a set of text, but if you give it poetry, does it know what to do with it? No. If you give it medical text, does it know what to do with it? If you give it legal documents, does it know what to do with it? You may have an AI engine that says it knows a particular language, but what we're actually saying is that there are actually maybe different levels of capability. There may be basic discovery, responsive tools, or generative AI. And what we want to do is develop strategies for a community to map the progressive states of readiness. And then when we do that, if we can create an ethical framework for this, then, and we're starting with a language that is well defined, that has hundreds of years of literature and data associated with it, that has some special characters associated with it, but not too many. So the language we're starting with is German. That's our inaugural language. And the hypothesis is, if we can determine what is the minimum viable data set that can represent German for an AI engine, and if we can build the data set, perform some experiments to see if the engine can actually be capable, if that works, then our hope is we can then build a framework that can be applied for any other language in the world, including languages that are not represented well online. So that's the thinking behind it. That's the first project. We have a couple of other projects we're working on, but this is the big one. And underneath all of this is the fact that you have identifiers, and the identifiers are in local languages, in scripts that are well defined. These are internationalized domain names. And also, there's an expectation that these internationalized domain names will just work everywhere on the internet, will just work in your browser, will work in your applications, will work in tools everywhere. And the reality is they don't. And so the universal acceptance piece of it is one part of this larger digital inclusion piece. And our concern is that, yes, you have to work on universal acceptance, but the world is evolving very rapidly with the growth of AI. And with that rapid evolution, we also have to start thinking of language representation in the AI era. And that's why we're saying we believe we may need to build a data set that represents any language. And if you know what the artifacts are necessary to represent any language, imagine if for German we're able to say, here are 15,000 pieces of content across these 700 fields that you need to create or you need to collect. And if you give that set of information and you feed it to an AI engine, the AI engine will have base level proficiency in German. And now, if you give it another 30,000 pieces of data that have certain characteristics associated with it in these categories, and you give it to the AI engine, maybe the AI engine will go from a basic level of fluency in German to an intermediate level of fluency in German. So, if you can do that, then you can imagine taking it to a language that has not been mapped at all online and say to that community, gather these 15,000 pieces of data in these 700 categories. And there's a pretty good chance that your language will now be representable in an AI system. And you can now start to have an interactive response that goes back and forth, and you can train them. So that's the thinking behind it. I'm excited about where this could go. UA is a key foundational element of all of this. Without UA, without IDNs and that part of it, all the rest of it cannot work. But our thinking here is that if you really want to look at digital inclusion, starts with UA and IDNs, but it doesn't end there. Back to you, Lars.
Thank you very much. So this was the first presentation to introduce us to the topic. And with this, I would like to hand over to Nitin to connect the topic to the world of the ISP.
Thank you, Lars. And thank you, Ram, for setting the context. Specifically, I'm Nitin Walia. So I represent GNSO and ISPCP constituency. Today, I'm going to do a little bit of intersection of universal acceptance, digital inclusion, and artificial intelligence. How these three together will shape the future of the truly inclusive internet. Universal acceptance may sound technical, but in reality, it touches something which is fundamental. Whether every person can fully participate in the internet in their own language. Just to give you an opening thoughts, basically, the internet was being designed to connect the world. And in many ways, it has succeeded. Billions of people are now online, but connection alone is not enough. If people cannot use the internet in their own language, then the internet is connected, but it is not fully inclusive. Universal acceptance helps to solve this challenge by ensuring that all domain names and email addresses works everywhere regardless of language and script. And that is the essential for building a truly global internet. Today, the internet has almost more than 5.4 billion users. And as mentioned by Ram, it supports almost like 5,000 odd languages. Yet, many software systems still reject valid domain names and email addresses. For example, internationalized domain names or EI email addresses or new top-level domain names, Latin scripts, non-Latin scripts basically, we face a bigger challenge with them. The internet is multilingual, but many applications still behave as if the internet was ever for asking only. Let me ask everybody a question. How many of you have ever seen a website reject a perfectly valid email address and domain name? I think almost everyone in this room will say that. And that's the UA problem, actually. Because you have valid domain names, you have valid email addresses, the websites are rejecting it. And we have seen a very classical real life example a couple of years back when the first time in India, And I think that was globally the first and the largest deployment of any EAI email addresses. The government of Rajasthan, which is from India, they decided to give one free email address to every citizen of the state. So in Rajasthan, we have almost like 80 million citizens which are out there. So they decided, let's give any free email address to everyone so that they get inclusive, they got connected. The decision was being made, and they give the primary Hindi email ID to all the citizens. Almost like 10 million email addresses were being created. People start using it to communicate among each other, and everything was going fine. But slowly, when people start going to LinkedIn, Facebook, other social media websites, and then they start booking their tickets and putting that email addresses, majority of the places they were finding the rejection. Every time the website says, put a valid email address, which was a UA issue in those applications. And it was not tricky to solve, but yet it was there, which gives a denting impression to these people who have created those email addresses. When I talk about the universal acceptance ensures that all valid domain names and email addresses are handled correctly across internet systems. And this means they must accept, validate, store, process, and display correctly across all internet applications and devices. In simple terms, if it's a valid, it should work everywhere. So universal acceptance is just not a technical upgrade, basically. It's a foundation of a digital inclusion. UA enables digital identity in every language, participation in the global digital economy, innovation in the local language and ecosystem, and access for the next billion internet users. Without universal acceptance, the internet cannot truly serve the entire world. So when we say UA, so in practice, UA actually, the real world use cases are the websites and the digital services can operate into local languages. Users can create email addresses in native scripts using email address, which are EAI, which is email address internalization. Governments can deliver public services in local languages, and communities can participate more meaningfully in the digital economy. Because connectivity alone is not inclusion, universal acceptance makes connectivity usable. In a UA expert group, Edwin is our co-chair actually with Samad, and we have been discussing on the guidelines which have been published. And in last 3 days, in every session, I think one biggest question was AI, which was being raised. That have you covered the AI into that? AI and the future of the internet. I'm just trying to put certain things into that. At the same time, another major transformation is happening. Artificial intelligence is rapidly reshaping how the internet works. It is influencing search, communication, software development, and user interfaces. So AI will play a major role in determining whether the internet becomes more inclusive or less inclusive. And this is where AI intersects with universal acceptance. AI can significantly accelerate universal acceptance adoption. For example, AI can help detect compatibility issues across the software systems. Normally, converting your application or a website is not challenging, but it's a kind of a chicken and egg story wherein people are just waiting. If there's a demand, I'm going to look into my application and make sure it's been redesigned or refined. Since redesigning or resolving the issue is commercially, there's a commercial which is involved for the organizations. So normally they don't prefer to do that actually. But now in today's AI world, it's just a bug which needs to be resolved. If you can just give your data to any AI engine, Claude or anything, and ask them to make the application UTF-8 ready. So I think it's a minutes of time in which your entire application can be UA ready actually. So we should see AI as an enabler actually, which can help rapid development of the applications, which can be universal acceptance ready. And it can not only do the development, it can also create multilingual interfaces and improve accessibility by technologies. In other words, AI has a potential to enable universal acceptance directly into the future internet architecture. One of the biggest barrier to UA today is simply lack of testing. This is an example which I thought to share. So many of the applications and websites are not tested for compatibility with IDNs and internationalized email addresses. AI can help solve this. AI systems can scan the website and applications, detect the rejection of a non-ASCII domain names or email addresses, and suggest code improvements. It makes UA testing automated and scalable. Obviously, there are always a risk which is there in the mind. So, however, there's also a risk in this particular digital exclusion. If AI systems are trained primarily on ASCII-centric environments, they may not properly support IDNs or internationalized domain names. So that could create a barrier to the digital identity in the local languages. And the potential widen the global digital divide. I think this is the right time when this thing is taking a shape, that universal acceptance may be embedded in the AI-powered internet system from beginning, before it's too late. So I think if we start looking into that direction, many things will be solved with AI which are still pending from a couple of decades. I belong to the ISPCP constituency, and I just want to correlate how ISP and connectivity providers can help in universal acceptance and doing their work in universal acceptance. This is where internet service providers and connectivity providers play a crucial role, actually. ISPs and connectivity providers are the backbone of the internet. They operate network used by billions of users. They deploy DNS infrastructures, email platforms, hosting services, and they translate internet standards into the real world deployments. Through their infrastructure and services, connectivity providers can enable adoption of IDN and email address centralization at a scale. And this is how universal acceptance moved from policy discussion to global deployments. So when we say infrastructure, from an infrastructure perspective, connectivity providers ensures DNS infrastructure supports IDNs and support likely IDNA 2008. They also ensures network tools correctly resolve Unicode domain names. From a service perspective, ISPs can deploy SMTP UTF-8 enabled email servers, support internationalized email addresses, and provide UA-ready hosting platforms. So these are the few of the examples in which you normally see the email domain names which are there in IDNs. When we say driving the multilingual internet, connectivity providers also help expand the multilingual internet ecosystem. They can promote IDN domain names adoption among businesses, enable local language email addresses, support multilingual digital identity, and encourage developers and platforms to build UA-ready services. This accelerates local language internet adoption and supports digital inclusion for the next billion users. I think I'm coming to the end. Let me summarize 3 key takeaways for you. First, universal acceptance is essential for a truly global and multilingual internet. Second, artificial intelligence can accelerate inclusive digital innovation, but only if UA principles are incorporated. Third, ISPs and connectivity providers play a critical role in enabling adoption at scale. Achieving universal acceptance requires collaboration across the entire ecosystem. The internet we must build is one where every domain name works, every email address works, every language works everywhere. Universal acceptance makes this future possible. So the final line before I end, the internet does not become global simply by connecting people. It becomes global when people can participate into their own local language. So with that, I end my thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nitin. Apologies that I didn't ask this after the first presentation from Ram. Are there any questions that we would like to address in between? Yes, please.
This is Sanvi for the record. I just wanted to ask that why have you specifically chosen German as the inaugural language for the yes.
Thank really 2 or 3 reasons. The biggest reason is that a lot of German language material content is digitized and is available in an online fashion. So it's fairly quick to go take it and have AI engines ingest it. That's one big part. The second part is that the German language has been studied for a long time, and not just studied as a language, but also in how computer systems can analyze and access and transform and modify the German language. There is a lot of research, decades of research in that area. So that can also be leveraged. And the final thing is that one of the 2 lead researchers, a professor from NYU in the US, is actually German. And so she's got a direct interest and a direct background and ability to help lead the work.
Thank you very much. I'm a native German, but I didn't know about this. So thank you very much for sharing the information.
Yes, just a question for Nitin. Can you go back, please, to slide number 12? Yes, here. So here we can see another UA issue. For example, the top-level domains, the ID and CCTLDs that we have in the bottom of the slide, you can see one in Arabic, which is .as-Saudia for Saudi Arabia. But as you can see here, the dot is after the word. So because the Arabic script is from right to left, So this is an issue. So this cannot be processed correctly. So the dot should be before. So it's dot as Saudi, which is after. And this is another issue that we have in universal acceptance in general for IDNs first and for email address internationalization is some languages are from right to left, and all existing applications are configured by default to process everything by default from left to right. So this is a good example. Thank you very much, Nitin, for your excellent presentation and also for mentioning the role of AI. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other further questions before we move on with the next? Yes, please.
Hi. My question, AI systems are trained primarily on ASCII-centric environments. Today, the major AI platforms that are being used across the globe are being developed in ASCII-centric environments because those countries in which those models are being developed, they have English as the primary language. So I was thinking on the lines that how they perceive UA as an issue versus how we perceive UA as an issue. There is a difference in the values that we see out of UA. So that is one thing that we need to address. And country like India, which has n number of languages, I don't know whether it's right direction to think, but I was thinking whether is it the cost of UA versus the cost of literacy, providing quality education to people so that they can be ready to access the technologies which are being developed in ASCII-centric environments. What's your thought on that?
So when you say that the primary applications are being key-centric, it's not because they have been developed into Western region. There are issues in ASCII-centric environments in UA. Because when you talk about UA is not just language issue. It talks about all valid domain names. Initially, when the entire application architectures were being created, people just thought that the domain names would be of 3 letters. .com, .net, .org. And many of the applications have even hard-coded that the domain names would be of 3 letters. And that from there, the bigger problem for UA started. Because when .network, .library, .restaurant, .club, lot many domain names got registered, a lot many domains got available for registration actually into those GTLDs and CCLDs. They all start facing the issue. So it's not just because ASCII is one issue. There were domain names in ASCII who were still not working on the applications. So when UA was being formed to address these issues, specifically in the AI world today, it's what kind of a data you are feeding into it. And that's the reason I said it's the initial stage. And when you take an example of India, that we have almost like 22 official languages, we have almost like 6,000 odd languages. And that's the reason the government has taken an initiative to educate the people into their local languages. Now you can become a doctor by giving an examination in Tamil or Gujarati. You don't need to learn English for that. And that's the basic purpose across the entire humanity, across the entire globe. It's not mandatory for you to learn English. It was a kind of an exchange language, so that when you speak to somebody in China, it's not mandatory for you to know Chinese. But yes, there's a middle language which was English, so people can easily communicate and talk and discuss about that. Even today, we are sitting in India and we are talking in English just because of the reason, because it's all inclusive and generally being used. Otherwise, that is not the language which you normally speak to your home. So, as far as the overall issue of UA is concerned, AI definitely will play a vital role if we feed the data rightly into that. And if you are able to do that, things are done. Same you have seen on Google and everywhere. The entire data sets which are getting created and the government is creating the website into various languages, they are going to create a data set which is going to help AI into that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
I have a quick follow-up on that. Another issue with even ASCII-centric environments, one thing that hasn't been stressed here is entering usernames and passwords. If you're writing in German and your password has an O with an umlaut on it, there are at least two ways of representing that in ASCII. One of them is a character that's the O with the umlaut. The other one is an umlaut combining with an O. And they won't match if you just do a byte by byte comparison. You need to normalize them and compare them that way. So even with AI, with ASCII centric, there are a lot of issues involved. And then I'm not even getting into things like Turkish eyes and things like that. Yes, it's quite a mess. And I agree that AI systems will help us find the sweet spot.
Yeah, I'd like just to add to something here to Barry. This is something that is common to other languages, like in the Arabic script, we have faced the same thing with madda, etc. Not only variant, but when you have combined and you need to represent them, and there are many ways to represent the same thing, whether they are separate Unicode or there is one Unicode code point that will mix the two and represent one. Finally, the user can see the same thing, but the code is different. We have two different code points and it will impact password, etc. So one of the recommendations that we have seen in universal acceptance is to unify the representation of Unicode, for example, embracing UTF-8, for example, that will be common in all applications, so that this way we can bypass this limitation. Thank you.
Just briefly, there's a little silver lining to this. AI systems are also being trained in Chinese. So we have bipolar world. It's not great, but it's not only ASCII.
In Chinese, you have simplified versus traditional Chinese. And how does that work? Yeah, nothing is easy.
Okay, I've got one final question from Philippe, and then I think that we move on with the presentation.
Hopefully, I'm being curious on CODI and the research work track that you referred to. I forget the terms precisely, but the sort of minimum data set for a language to be active or efficient in the AI kind of economy. How do you measure that? Or is that part of the research, by the way? Do you have metrics to determine that, whether that's a hit, a miss, anything in between?
Yeah, great question. And that's also part of the reason why we picked German, because it's a well-documented thing. If you get instructed in German, there are tests. If you're administered a test, that test tells you what your level of proficiency in German is. So you take those tests and you administer that to the AI engine that has ingested the data set, and you have the evidence of what is its
Proficiency
level
of-
of fluency.
That makes sense. Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, I would suggest we move on and give the floor to Nabil.
Thank you. So this is Nabil for the record, a SAC member, and also a member of the expert working group on universal acceptance. So this talk will include an update on the work that we have done in the expert working group to promote all domain names and email addresses, and to see the guidelines that we have developed, to talk about them, and to move forward. So this is a brief overview. There will be a background, scope of the work, summary of proposed guidelines, and what we have in the next step. The UA experts working group formed to focus on UA adoption, which means that we want to move from awareness and training to something much more effective, which is adoption. We need to see how this has been deployed and adopted in various regions of the world. Last year, ICANN board resolved to evaluate and evolve strategies to support UA adoption by ICANN.org and the community, aligning with ICANN's strategic plan for fiscal year of 26 and 30. In response, the ICANN president and CEO announced the establishment of Universal Acceptance Expert Working Group, which will provide these guidelines for ICANN's future work on UA adoption. And the guidelines are now published on the ICANN website, seeking public comments from the community. These are the following call for nominations, and we have here the names of the members of this expert working group from different constituencies and ICANN groups, as you can see. And the ICANN president and CEO appointed the following additional representatives from different other groups outside the ICANN, like Unicode Consortium, UNESCO, China Internet Network Information Center, Worldwide Web Consortium, Meta, and Stanford University. And we have the pleasure to our chairs, Edmond Chang and Salmat Hussein. And Edmond is with us for any other questions. So the scope of the work is that the UA Experts Working Group is tasked to develop these guidelines to address multiple topics. Group started the weekly meeting in August 25, discussing the 10 topics in its charter, developing and reviewing guidelines for these topics. And finally, we have developed or shortlisted 45 guidelines covering these topics. As I have mentioned, now the guideline has been published on the website, and we are now in the public comment period, seeking feedback from the community. And then we will, in the next ICANN meeting, I think, if I'm not wrong, we will present the final version. So the 45 guidelines have been grouped into specific topics, or 10 topics, as you can see. We have general guidelines, we have guidelines for encouraging big tech organizations, open source communities, specific standards organizations and standardization bodies, how to reach out to software development professionals, reach out to system admin, to academia, to public sector, to hosting providers and ISPs, and also how we can measure concretely aspects of UA adoption. So let's deep dive a bit on these guidelines. For all stakeholders, we need to define what is meant by UA ready. But before going into this detail, I would like to ask you all here, who first coined this term, which is universal acceptance? Do you have any record on this? Who first coined this term?
I think now, Mohan.
Yes, this guy. So in the guidelines, we need first to define what is meant to be UA ready for any software or application or framework in the context of multilingual internet, and how it's dependent on internationalization of the technology stack, which is the main thing that we need to understand. So for big tech, for example, organization, we need to showcase the economic and business, social, linguistic, cultural value of this work in tailored messaging, meaning that we need to change the language that we are using with these big tech companies to encourage them to embrace this technology or this principle, this paradigm, and to be included in their solutions. For example, if I take the example of the email addresses, we can see that majority of existing software for email servers are UA ready. But still, right now, the big tech companies providing or providers of email addresses, they don't give you the right to create a new email account using your own script. Yes, they have their reasons, but now we have defined some ways on how we can encourage them, how we can see what are the limitations and why they are still hesitating, and how we can fix this to move forward. And here by messaging, we mean the key values proposition, for example, why UA matters for them or to them, and what they gain by adopting it. So they need to see benefits, otherwise they will not move. Definitely, this is their job. And also we need to emphasize on what problems they might face if they don't adopt. That is also part of the guidelines, and what they should do as their next step. So while also arguing for technical aspect, including interoperability and security and trust aspect achieved by supporting UA. So we need to prioritize the engagement based on technology stack, focusing on underlying systems and application used by the higher layers. If the lower layers we have fixed the problem, we need to see what next for the higher layers. Yeah. So the guidelines touch to also the open source communities, and we emphasize that we need vertical stack to be configured. And the vertical stack means looking at issues across different layers, such as the operating system, libraries, code, programming languages. So all are linked somehow. This is why we need to set up this vertically. Also for the standardization bodies like the IETF and other organizations, there should be a coordinated approach that is needed to prevent the chicken and egg problem between platform providers, applications, and service providers. So we need to participate in internationalization standards groups to help integrate the UA concept when consulted by other standards groups. One of the standardization body that started on this, for example, for IDNs, it was first in the IETF. They needed to provide us the technology that can be used to request something from the DNS in non-Latin script, and it can answer. And then this has been deployed and encouraged and advocated by ICANN. So as you can see here, different organizations are playing together to achieve this noble cause. And for software development professionals, we need to develop appropriate messaging and identify effective strategies to reach all stakeholders by collaborating with relevant organizations, presenting at conferences and industry events. This is not only for software development, but also for other venues. For example, in academia, as we will see, we need to encourage call for papers when it comes to conferences, that we can dedicate one track to universal acceptance. With this, people can be encouraged to submit in this field or to write a paper and submit this paper in this track. So there is a dedicated track to this field, which is universal acceptance. Same thing here. And given the limited number of experts who understand these concepts, particularly internationalization, maybe because for those who are not concerned by something that is not based on the Latin script, they don't know about the details about internationalization. But what about the other communities? So it's important to train the trainers to form those who can teach engineers and students and all other interested users to develop materials using existing resources and establish mechanisms to build capacity. So that the trainer is a good example that we can mimic from previous experiences for other tasks. So also we need to showcase adoption to motivate others. This is something that we need to do also in UA Day activities, where you see adoption, and when we are encouraging those who would like to organize something to show their successful adoption of UA, so that other countries, communities can do the same, are encouraged to do the same. In the DNS industry, engagement should include the GTLDs, CCTLDs, registries, registrars, resellers. So the DNS in this industry plays definitely a key role in enabling universal acceptance, and the effort should focus on promoting adoption through well-tailored messaging and proactive outreach to relevant stakeholders. They need to encourage users to create domain names, IDNs in different scripts, and to make it easy for them to do this. Engage also with the intergovernmental organization, IGOs, to integrate universal acceptance into the global digital agenda and encourage member states to include UA adoption by the DNS industry and the broader digital sector in their national action plans. Now we move to the hosting providers and ISPs. They have also a crucial role here to play. Establish mechanisms to encourage them to offer IDNs and email address internationalization, hosting services to registrants. Assess the extent of gaps in universal acceptance, adoption among hosting providers, and identify the underlying causes. So we need to follow up to see how can we fix the existing and the limitations and the issues. We need to develop out-of-the-box technical solutions and promote awareness and capacity to facilitate their deployment, strengthen the capacity of hosting providers and ISPs, and encourage UA adoption through targeted messaging and outreach. And for the public sector, we need to engage with multiple relevant ministries, departments in the public sector, and with the policy-oriented messaging strategy, which highlights the value of UA adoption. So this is something that you can see that is recurrent in all my slides, is to highlight the value of the UA adoption and what might be lost if we don't adopt. So this is maybe before the last one, which is about academia. Academia, so we all know that any success or any move or any change in any society should come from university. This can guarantee that we can sustain this update, this change. We can educate the next engineers on the fact that universal acceptance is a fact, is a reality, is the normal thing on how things should work. It's not an exception. It's not an exception. And until now, we have, with ICANN, developed the curricula for different micro modules to be easily integrated in existing curricula. We hope to see universities in the coming month adopting and testing this new material that we have, so that we can see the first learners and the first engineers that took these different courses and their level of readiness when it comes to deployment of universal acceptance. The next step is planning and implementing the guidelines, and now we are seeking feedback from the community so that we can move forward. Yeah, so this is about the public comments, and with this, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So first of all, round of applause for our speakers. Thank you very much.
So Nabil, I was wondering whether you have a specific outreach effort towards the, I don't know what to call them, AI engine companies, in the sense that those are not only generating material, but they're generating codes, they're generating websites that should be expected to be UA ready moving forward. And the likelihood that most of those within 2 years will be AI generated. So I'm just wondering whether you make those targets specific or they fall into the bucket of software development companies.
That's a good question and a good suggestion. Definitely, AI for the moment is not included in the guidelines, and maybe something that we need to add. We need to discuss between us after receiving the public comments. Because if so, this goes and aligns with the slogan of AI for all. AI for all should embrace all languages. You need to train your models on different languages. And why now different generative AI platforms give us accurate answers when we ask in English compared to other languages? Because there is content on the web that is in English, so that these platforms are trained on this content and they perform well in this language compared to others. So now in the other side, we need an internet for all with all existing languages represented in the internet. Beside the web, we need to move forward to the other services so that we can promote this. So this is in parallel with what we want to achieve, definitely. So AI now is part of the landscape. Thank you. Edmond, maybe you need to add something. It's okay.
No, not really. But the only thing I want to add is the public comment period is open. So please do submit your public comment from the ISPCP and others who are paying attention to UA as well.
So thank you to the speakers and everyone who has joined today. And it is really honored to have Ramon sir, who is the father of this word UA, as a speaker in this session. And I'm thankful to the ISEC leadership and ISPCP leadership. So today we have learned how AI can help the adoption of UA in a large scale. So thank you so much, and I encourage you to follow our website and please join in other outreach sessions. Thank you. And we are also thankful to Edmund and Sarmad, who has joined remotely for the UA vice chairs. So thank you all.
Adjourn. Thank you.